Hi there, thanks for watching. Okay, this is part two. Just want to continue with this very important topic, which is how self-esteem is, I believe, sort of a breakdown of the dialectical process. Okay, whether positive or negative. Okay, the fact that we would ever pretend to sort of assess who we are, okay, cognitively, that is, to me, that's disposing of a live dissonant issue as opposed to just holding it. Okay. Now, I really do propose that the dialectical process, okay, in some sense, is poetically is sort of part of an essential part of the human heart. It's the holding of dissonances, okay, without disposing, or at least having some time with these issues before disposing. Okay, obviously, we have to be expedient. We have to dispose issues, but the more we can hold, and in some cases, I think we hold without disposing. You know, I think when something as deep as an assessment of who I am, okay, I think that is an indefinite issue which should never be disposed. Okay, and so that's why I think that healthy people, if you really ask them on the spot, what is your self-esteem? I think a lot of healthy people would be like, God, let me think about that. Because I think a lot of people they don't think about they don't get to the point of assessing exactly how good am I, or summarizing, what is my esteem of myself, how do I assess myself. And so I think for something like assessing oneself, I think that should never be determined. I think that's just an ongoing holding of just the dissonances of the bag of just all the dissonant things that make our experience. And I think in some sense, I would hope that for the people most close to us, that there are times when we may have to make some kind of just like chapter assessments. Like for this chapter, just because that may help us make decisions. Like maybe someone really does have to distance themselves from a parent, for a few months, or maybe things get rocky. Let's say with a sibling, maybe with an in-law, or like say my sister-in-law, whatever. Where it may be wise for me to take some distance from my brother, just because it'll just give space to everybody. But to make those kind of very serious assessments, I'm not making a final assessment of who they are, whether I think they're good or bad, but I'm just, maybe making like a chapter assessment for a period. And I think in that case, we should make some disposal of the issue just to make the decision. But I think it's good to give like 21 days or like 14 days, and not to have so quick of an assessment. Those things deserve a lot of, I would say, due process. Okay, and so I think that the due process we see in the legal system and in constitutional law, I think, is an analog to basically that part of our heart that holds dissonant things and allows them to process before disposing of them. Okay, but then on something as deep and as existential as and even as arrogant, or I'm sorry, as presumptuous as this idea that we could make a cognitive assessment of how good or how bad that I am, or if we really want to get to making an assessment of a person, like a final assessment of how good or bad they are. Okay, as opposed to, like, let's say the practical assessment: do I want to be friends with that person? That's more practical. But if regardless of whether I decide to be friends with a person, to make that final assessment of how good or bad, or final, who are they? What do I think of them? I think really those kind of like encapsulating assessments, I think, are very I don't think we should dispose those issues like that. I think we should always leave everything on the table as far as like making a final assessment about a person. Whether we choose to be friends with them, that's a more surface assessment. And I can make an assessment whether I can be friends with a person, or the degree of friendship I can have with a person. I can make that assessment without making a final assessment of what I think of the entirety of that person. And so I think that with those ideas in mind, I think we can sort of develop sort of like a personal constitution, like a commitment that, for certain issues I will allocate, and really give, let's say 8 to 10 hours of due process, or 10 to 12 hours, whatever as a routine. Like I'll give things due process before I dispose of them. You know, um, maybe for some other issues that are more serious, like whether I want to be friends with someone or what the degree of friendship I want to have with a person. Let's say for the next 6 months or whatever. I can make that assessment maybe with 7 days. Like just as a benchmark. That we can program ourselves to sort of hold dissonant ideas without disposing, okay, and just be uncomfortable in that dissonance. Let's say, okay, for this type of issue, 7 days, okay. Something more serious, like say with my mother or my brother, or let's say my children or my wife, maybe I won't make a serious decision without 21 days or a month of just holding it, to let it sit, and that way I can really from the heart, really, and that's good for our heart because we're developing that part of our heart. And again, I don't think we should like actually mechanically program the actual dialectical process. The dialectical process is organically going to happen as long as we just let dissonant things just be on the table. Okay, so you don't have to know how to be dialectical. We are dialectical. All you have to do is just put dissonant things on the table and don't shoo them off the table. Okay. And so the idea is, different for different levels of assessment, we can maybe have a commitment of due process in our constitution that for different levels of assessment, we allocate, let's say, maybe 10 hours for some, maybe for others, maybe 3 or 4 days, maybe 7 days for others. And then for more serious things, maybe a month, you know, and maybe for really, really serious things, maybe up to 4 months, really just I'll leave it on the table for 4 months. And that is my due process. And that will develop our heart. That will develop the part of us that can have sort of the organic dialectic, okay, which is we deserve to grow that because that's a very essential part of the human soul. And probably that is probably more meaningful than the superficial ideas that are not well defined about, oh, that person has empathy, that person has compassion. I think at some point those might even seem like superficialities, that the real goodness of the heart is not some trite cartoonish idea of, oh, he's a good person, he's a bad person, but just being able to hold dissonances and really hold them in the heart for long periods of time. Okay. And then organically there will be dialectic. And I think that dialectic is worth more than a superficial empathy or a compassion. I think those words are so trivial and so cheap. And I think we're talking about real heart processing. Okay. And that's much deeper than those superficial things. Okay. Um, so then let's get back to the idea. The main point of these two videos. This is part two of a two-part video on self-esteem. Okay. I don't believe that self-esteem is a. I don't think self-esteem is evidence of healthy dialectical processing. Okay. I don't think any positive or negative self-esteem is a healthy. That does not reflect a healthy dialectical processing. I think for something as deep as um, how I assess myself, okay, and also how I assess other people. So let's just take this idea of self-esteem, any self, not just me. When I say self-esteem, I'm talking about how I esteem, how I estimate anybody, okay, any self, not just mine, okay. So like, let's just talk about like esteeming someone, esteeming myself, esteeming someone else. I think those are indeterminate. Indeterminate. There's no way to make a determinate assessment, even after the person is dead. There's no way I could gather all the information and all the secrets to really know all the biography of a person. Okay. And while a person is alive, there's always some level of plasticity and possibility and flexibility that you don't want to put a confinement or let's say um, um, kind of a condemning prophecy, on someone who still has an open possibility. You know, it's just not. First, it's false, and secondly, it's inappropriate. And I think it really is an abandonment of the place where our dialectic should be ongoing, continuous, and never ending. Okay. And so I think if we do develop a constitution for ourselves, I think the constitution of values should be that when it comes to making a final esteem, the issues of the final self-esteem of anybody or me or anybody else, those are all things that do not have a disposal. They don't get adjudicated. They are constantly on the table. and constantly being reconciled in the dialectic. Okay, we don't have to know how to do dialectic. Dialectic just happens organically if we just leave it on the table. Okay, so I really believe that a really healthy person, if you ask them, what is your self-esteem? I believe often, they may mechanically say, "Oh, I have good self-esteem," but they're not really answering the question. They're just kind of, I think, really, truly, I think a lot of healthy people, if you ask them, "What is your self-esteem?" they'll probably say, "Gee, let me think about that. I'm not really, I don't know, like, let me think about that." Like, I don't think it. I think the sign of a healthy person is that those things don't get adjudicated and disposed. They're ongoing. And yes, what is a self? A self, no matter how ideal, no matter how healthy or unhealthy, a self is just a bag of dissonances, because every constellation of different points of view that can exist inside a person, all the different issues that come into a life, okay, with all the different possibilities and points of view, that is just a bag of dissonances. A bag of dissonances, okay? It's inherently a little uncomfortable, okay? Not necessarily traumatic, but it's just uncomfortable because it's normal in the constellation of dissonances of all the issues that come into a person. It is just inherently dissonant. It's just a bag of dissonances. Dissonances are not necessarily pleasant, okay? But they're also not necessarily bad. Okay, that's just what it means to have a lot of possibility in the space of a person. Okay, it's just inherently dissonant. Okay, and so yeah, it does take a little training, and maybe it does take a little like maturity, a little bit of character. But I fully believe that in steps, we can sort of learn to sort of just have dissonances be in our space, be on the table without sort of disposing them with quick adjudications. Okay, because that's basically, quick adjudication is a way of not processing, and it's sort of a way of sort of abandoning and sort of degrading and limiting the dialectical process. Okay, now granted, I mean, if you're not used to having a big heaping plate of dissonances, okay, you may want to start with small doses, and sort of build up. you know so like, I mean, everything for me in cluster B is about taking baby steps. So like, if I wanted to learn not to have self-esteem, not to have any self-esteem, okay, which I think is just leaving all the dissonances on the table without wrapping it up into a trite, pretentious, presumptuous evaluation. Okay, just leaving things on the table. Leave the steaming pile of dissonances just on the table. Okay, but if let's say we're not even close to that, okay, if we just tend to summarize ourselves and, "Oh, I'm great, I'm bad, I'm great, I'm bad," it's like, okay, fine, that's where we are for now, okay, and probably I do it too, right? But maybe to move on the path towards just being, okay, just being and just having things in our space and just not trying to resolve them mechanically, just letting them be in our space and letting the organic heart naturally metabolize all the dissonances that are just in the presence. Okay, if we can't just do that all at once, all right, maybe we can start with just going in steps, baby steps. Like, say, um, maybe like, say, for the first 6 weeks, I could have like a plan. Like, okay, I'm going to go in 6 weeks modules. Like in my first 6 weeks, my goal is that as a benchmark, okay, whenever I have, like, say, just an unease about myself, uneasy feelings, I'm going to try to just let it sit there, okay, without fussing it, without reacting to it for 2 hours, okay? And then after 2 hours, if I want to go buy a bucket of KFC, or if I want to, put on some makeup, or, dress a certain way and start feeling like I'm presenting like like start making like a self-esteem procedure on myself. Okay, but 2 hours. So basically, or let's say, maybe it could go the other way too. Like, a lot of times our self-esteem really is just kind of a way of disposing of just the inherent kind of unease of having an effective kind of an effective state, and then sort of making something to wrap it up and sort of dispose of it, so we don't just have to sit there having an undefined emotion. Okay, so I believe it's inherently dissonant, to have either a positive or negative emotion that doesn't get defined into our sense of self. Okay. So, because just having things in the air, that's just inherently, it's sort of like a dot, dot, dot. Like, how is this going to resolve? So, like, let's say I could just be feeling really positive, or maybe I'm feeling kind of ambitious, like, gee, maybe I'd like to get a business plan. I'd like to, oh, yeah, gosh, this could be a really successful business. I could sell books, I could start a business or whatever. And you start to get into that kind of euphoric, whatever. And you sort of want to sort of make it into a story to sort of give it sort of like a package, give it and sort of dispose of the issue instead of just letting the feeling just be there. Because if the feeling is just there in the air, I guess the idea is that, well, what's happening with it? What will happen to it? It's just sort of like affect. And the same with negative. We sometimes we want to create kind of like a negative story to sort of not just be negative, not just have negative feelings, and that's a way of kind of wrapping it up and getting it off the table. Sort of unresolved, just the unresolved sort of flow of different arousal states, different affective states. I think is kind of uneasy. So maybe we could make like a program, like in the first 6 weeks. Okay, whenever I have just sort of like a spontaneous, kind of like I'm feeling sort of positive, or I'm feeling kind of manic, or I'm feeling kind of ambitious, sort of optimistic. Instead of trying to create like kind of a fantasy to sort of package into that affect, I'll just let the affect float like a cloud. Oh yeah, a little bit. I'm feeling optimistic. The optimistic is like a cloud, just and then that cloud will sort of transform into another cloud, and maybe it'll turn into a gray cloud, a rain cloud, you know. And then from the rain cloud, instead of trying to form like a kind of like a story around it and a fantasy and sort of make somebody sort of get it off the table, I'll just let the gray cloud just flow through the atmosphere and maybe disappear, and then blue sky, or then maybe night sky, you know. Um, and basically just maybe for the first 6 weeks, whenever I have, like, say, a cloud appear, a positive, bright, fluffy white cloud, or a dark cloud, or a night sky, a blue sky, or a dark sky, or whatever, I will let 2 hours, I'll try to set a benchmark of 2 hours to just sort of let it be weather, just let it be the clouds. And then maybe after those 6 weeks, if I can sort of get that benchmark, maybe I could make it like, say, 3 hours. If I'm not able to get the benchmark, then I just renew the benchmark for the next 6 weeks and see if I can, maybe after 12 weeks, if I can do the 2 hours. And if that doesn't work after like, say, 12 weeks, maybe I can go to 1 hour and see if then I can do it. Whatever, just playing with it, whatever. But I do think it's important that we learn that a lot of our assessments about people, about ourselves, are basically ways that we rationalize around sort of affects in the air. Like, say, if I see a really attractive person and they make me feel really good, like, oh, it's a piece of heaven. That person is a piece of heaven. It's like, why can't I just have the feeling and not put a sense on it? Like, say, oh wow, I just got stimulated. Okay, I just saw this radically attractive person with a great personality, and okay, whoa, okay, just let it be the zen of just the energetic. It's like I just got a shot of drugs. And then just, that's a white cloud. I'm not going to have any guessing about that person. It's just a person. It's like somebody just someone in the scene. They just came and they went. I'm not going to think anything. And then a big white cloud. And then over time, after a couple hours, it just transforms into blue sky, or a sunset. And I didn't think anything. I think we have to practice that, because that is a way that we can allow ourselves just to have the affect and the dissonances of the weather of our arousal. Okay. And we will start to learn that we don't know anything about these people. They might be good, they might be bad, they might be a mixture of good and bad, but probably what happened was their attractiveness just spiked a bunch of neurotransmitters and stuff, and it's like taking a drug. Okay, well, whatever. It's just a big cloud, and just put less meaning onto it, and less assessment. You know what I mean? Because that way we can just sort of hold all these different arousal situations, okay, without having to make a story or make a plan. Like, say, I could get really enthusiastic about maybe some idea that could be a business. And it's like I start thinking like, oh my God, this could be so successful. Well, why not just say, hey, it's a good idea? You know, what's right in front of me? It's just an idea. You know, I could have an idea for making English muffins a certain way. That could be like artisan English muffins. You know, they could be sold like on the neighborhood level. It's like really artisan. You know, very from scratch. You know, great stuff. Well, instead of thinking so far ahead, just okay. So the ideas are, I like English muffins, so make some English muffins. You know, no big plan. I'll just make a really good set of English muffins, and if they turned out really good, I'll see if I can do it again. I'll see if I can tweak the recipe. Maybe 6 months down the road, I'll really have it down. You know, and maybe I could share it with some people, and if they really like it, you know, then I could offer them, and maybe just in a friend group, I could just make a habit of sharing English muffins. And you know, if it's like a mild hit with my friends, so what? You know, and if it gets maybe more popular, okay, with that's to be determined through time. It's not to be anticipated. You know what I mean? Or maybe after 6 months, I find my friends kind of got tired of it. And yes, they're great English muffins, but they just didn't turn out to be so great as to make a splash in the world. And so they were good. And I can still make them anytime I want. And when I have people over, you know, I can make hamburgers with English muffin buns, and it's kind of a cool thing. But it didn't turn out to be a big splash in the world, but it's still something. It is what it is. You see what I mean? So just let things be what they are and enjoy them for what they are. You know what I mean? And just don't try to sort of program and dispose and sort of adjudicate and sort of, why not just let it be the stinking mess of just being what it is, you know? So again, I would just propose that I think it's very good to go in modules and steps, you know. So as far as like this issue of getting over the self-esteem, positive and negative, okay, which are both, I think, very symptomatic, okay, very symptomatic of a degraded dialectical processing, degraded dialectical processing. Um, Instead of having any kind of self-esteem, we can sort of program ourselves, okay, with regard to other people, with regard to ourselves, okay, that when we get stimulated to a place where we want to make an assessment, like, oh, that Brian Koberger, that murderer, oh, what a bad person, and Ted Bundy, you know, why not just be uncomfortable with just what happened? Okay, the guy killed people. The guy's probably has mental problems. He's probably, you know, fragmented personality. Just okay, just leave the stinking pile of what happened and just let it stink. You know what I mean? And just like maybe like I said, maybe for the first 6 weeks, I will learn to do it for 2 hours at a time. You know, and then once I can get 2 hours, then I go to 4 hours or 3 hours. You know, and then once I can do that, I go to half a day. And then once I do that, I try maybe a couple of days. You know, the same with myself. You know, maybe there are times where I kind of have an idea of who I am, or for bad or for worse, and it does happen. You know, but maybe I can go a couple of days and just be a being. You know, I'm just a stinking being with all these things happening. You know, all these dissonances in my constellation, and it's just operations in the world. You know, operations and just holding the dissonances. You know, and just not adjudicating them. And it is kind of like a Zen practice, you know, but I think we can go in steps, you know, and just understand that nothing more has to be done. There's no big technique. It's not like you have to be some fancy black belt at Buddhism or anything like that. Nothing. Okay. All you have to do is just let the stinking stuff just stink and be a big pile in the space. Okay. And just be all these dissonances, and automatically, organically, just by allowing it to be present, it'll automatically, organically, the dialectical processing will happen. It'll just happen organically, you know. And I just think it's so important that, you know, we don't have to mechanically train ourselves to be like the technique of actually having a heart. You know, the heart is there. It's just we just have to put things out there, you know, on the table in the space, and just having dissonances in the space is the medicine, so the heart can do what it does naturally, organically. You know, so you know, if I were really to propose, I think, like, say, a recovery program for cluster B, NPD, BPD, ASPD, HPD, even ADD, and drug addictive things. Okay, I would basically say it's just arousal management. Okay, and I think one of the most important things about arousal management is not to try to mimic, not to try to force and make mechanical the dialectical processing, but just leave things on the table. It's kind of like if I leave certain things out, the birds will come and eat them. You know what I mean? Like, if I like the birds, and also I don't want to leave like bad breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs may not be good for the birds. Find out what's good for the birds, but whatever. Like, have things on the table. It's good for us to have just dissonances just on the table. Okay, it's good for us. Okay, and we don't have to like tell the birds exactly what to do. They'll come. You know, if we just leave the stuff on the table, the dissonances, the heart will come and deal with it. Okay, we just have to believe that. But we have to have the courage just to leave the dissonances out there and to know that the heart will process it. And in some cases, indefinitely. Okay, when it comes to who I am or who other people are, that's indefinite. Okay, it's just leave it on the table, leave it on the table. Okay, now it is different when we make practical assessments of how we want to deal with people. Okay, like I will leave it on the table whether Pablo Escobar was a good person or not. I'll leave it on the table whether Chapo Guzman is a good person. Okay, but whether I want to deal with him, okay, yes, I can make practical assessments based on what he's done, based on what I think his character is. Okay, but that's not the final assessment of who he is. You see what I mean? It's a little bit different. It's like I don't have to decide whether I think he's ultimately, how good or how bad of a person to make an assessment whether I think it's smart for me to be close to that person. Okay, and I do think it's important, without actually making a final assessment of anybody or myself. Okay, there are things like compatibility, risk, relative power, relative strength, and not everybody is meant to be close to everybody. Just differences in background, differences in gender, differences in temperament, and different. People have different issues. It makes sense to sort of be careful about how close you're going to get to different people, and to make practical assessments of how you want to deal with people. Yeah, okay, without making an assessment of how great they are, how good they are, or anything. It's just practical real life assessment with no pretense of making that final esteem assessment of anybody. So it's kind of like the philosophy I have basically is that self-esteem in any direction is probably unhealthy. Okay, but making practical assessments, without having any ultimate without making any ultimate assessment of the person, just practical decisions, those are to be made. But even then, with some amount of due process. Okay, so like say, if I want to make a practical assessment of how I want to manage my friendships or even family relationships, I want to give those things, at least 7 days to 14 days, or maybe even 21 days, or even a month of just learning how to have those things on the table, but with the idea that those I will dispose those issues. I will make decisions, but I just hopefully in the practice of developing our heart, even decisions that have to be made, we will make them after a period of leaving things on the table, our dissonances on the table, so that decisions can come from the heart and we can develop our heart. And then for the most serious, the most existential assessment issues, okay, like who I am, how good I am, or how good a person is, those are just indefinite. And I think we ought to work on the path of eventually being able to leave those things on the table without any ultimate disposal. Okay, I really think that's very healthy, because I think that'll just develop the heart. And I think a lot of the things that appear to be missing in cluster B disorders, like conscience, and they say a lack of compassion, all these like buzzwords, we'll essentially solve those problems by developing our heart, and I think we'll become much more human and much more related in the world, and much better able to operate in the world, and to be, have a better judgment and better decision making, and a richer sort of processing of everything in our lives, so that we're not so split and so symptomatic. So anyway, just an idea, but I guess the final assessment, the final theme for these two videos is, I do think any kind of self-esteem of other people or myself, okay, I think that is a very pretentious, kind of a presumptuous cognitive assessment kind of thing. And I think really we should work more towards letting that be sort of indefinite. It's sort of like the fundamental example of how we should aspire to allowing a lot of dissonances to just be on the table without getting disposed. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I'm sorry it took me too long to say all that, but I try my best. So wishing the best for everybody, and thanks for watching.